Jamaica has the lowest share of immigrants in its population in the Caribbean, ahead only of a communist country and a failed state. International migration is a key feature of free and open economies, and most countries have virtually no barriers to immigration or people leaving. But every country has barriers to immigration or people coming in. Barriers to immigration serve to reduce labor market competition, to manage national security and public health, and to reduce the migration of people who will likely become a financial burden on the state. International migration is a key part of Jamaica's social, economic, and demographic story. 1 in 3 people who are born in Jamaica resides overseas. This includes up to 80% of our tertiary trained workers. In contrast, in Jamaica, just 0.8% of our population consists of immigrants. This is ahead only of Cuba and Haiti in the Caribbean. By comparison, in countries like the Bahamas, immigrants constitute 16% of the population. The imbalance between immigration and emigration in Jamaica is indicative of a net push factor environment. This includes unemployment, which averaged 17% since we became independent in 1962, growth rates that averaged just 1.4% since 67, and murder rates that rank us among the top 10 most murderous countries globally every year. Notwithstanding this historical context, the evidence has definitively shown that Jamaica's low stock of skilled workers is acting as a constraint on economic growth. Additionally, the country has a tight labor market, and employers are finding it difficult to find workers. These facts catalyze closer examination of the likely impacts of increased immigration to Jamaica and the policy and regulatory framework changes that would be necessary in order to achieve this. So as to have an empirical basis on which to predict the impacts of increased immigration on Jamaica, we analyze the effects of immigration on economic growth, entrepreneurship, productivity, investment, the fiscal budget, employment, and wages. These are the generalized findings. Increased immigration increases economic growth. In a study of selected OECD countries, we found that a 10% increase in the share of immigrants in a country led to a 0.15% increase in total economic output. This implies that immigrants contributed to greater economic growth in these countries. We also found that increased immigration increases entrepreneurship. Studies in the United Kingdom and the United States show that immigrants are nearly twice as likely as natives to start a business, and immigrant-owned businesses are 35% more likely to own a patent. Additionally, there is evidence that increased immigration increases productivity. High-skilled immigrants contribute technical skills, market knowledge, language skills, and cultural understanding. Meanwhile, low-skilled workers complement higher-skilled workers by filling jobs that locals simply cannot fill. A good example of this is a factory that requires managers, supervisors, line workers, support staff, etc. If the labor needs at any of those levels cannot be filled, then the total output of the entire operation will decline. Now, in aggregate, the evidence across developed economies shows that a 1% increase in immigration levels increases productivity by approximately 2%. Moreover, investment in both directions is positively impacted by immigration. A small positive relationship was observed between immigration and investment inflows in OECD countries. Additionally, in the United States, a doubling of the migrant share of the population in a particular region usually led to an increase in investment by up to 4 percentage points, and this impact lasted for many decades. But there's also an opportunity cost to restrictive immigration policies. In our interviews, several stakeholders pointed to examples where businesses decided not to invest in Jamaica or to postpone ongoing investments because of concerns that they would not be able to find the labor that they need in order to carry out their projects. This included projects in manufacturing, logistics, and information technology. As I mentioned before, restrictions on immigration are partially justified by the potential financial burden the immigrant will place on the state that they're going to. This study found that immigrants are usually net contributors to the fiscal budget. Generally, high-skilled immigrants contribute more than low-skilled immigrants. Furthermore, immigrants who work in the formal sector generally contribute more than immigrants who work informally. And this speaks to the need for labor market integration. Now, perhaps most importantly, immigrants tend to contribute more through taxes and benefit less through public service consumption than similarly qualified natives in the country that they've immigrated to. And their entire impact is usually within 1% of GDP, so marginal. Now, our study also found mixed and negative effects of immigration on wages and employment. The impacts of immigration on unemployment varies by skill and national income levels. Generally, immigrants have no impact on unemployment in rich countries. However, this may not hold for developing countries. Our study found that a 1% increase in Venezuelan immigrants in Colombian border regions led to a 0.1% decline in native Colombian employment. The effects of immigration on wages was also mixed, but this varied by skill levels. In Italy, immigrants improved wages when they complemented native workers. However, when immigrants in Italy constituted more than 8% of the employed population, wages tended to decline. In the European Union, immigrants reduced wages for low-skilled workers by 5%. In contrast, in the United States, immigrants contributed to an increase in wages, but this increase was limited to high-skilled workers. And finally, in the Dominican Republic, we found that low-skilled Haitian immigration to Dominica did not affect wages of locals. The benefits of immigration, even when weighed against the costs, serve as an independent argument for a pro-immigration environment, particularly for skilled workers. However, in Jamaica, the current context presents an additionally compelling case for facilitating higher levels of immigration. Jamaica has an unprecedented low unemployment rate of 4.5% after employment grew by 17% since 2013. As a consequence, a severe skills shortage has developed in the post-COVID recovery, and this cuts across several industries, occupations, and skill levels. In this context, Jamaica's immigration framework is bureaucratic and costly, disincentivizing immigration. As it stands, there are two broad categories of immigrants to Jamaica. The first category is workers who fall within one of 10 skill occupations from 12 CSME countries across the region. The second category of workers is workers who are from all non-CSME countries, plus workers who are from CSME countries but do not fall within one of 10 categories. Let's talk a little bit about immigrating as a CSME worker. In order to do so, you have to verify your qualifications and provide a criminal record. And that's about it. However, for non-CSME workers who fall within one of the 10 categories, that is, people who need to get work permits, they have to show their qualifications. They also have to show that locals are not available to do the job that they're coming to do. And the work permit takes about 6 to 8 weeks to be processed, according to the Ministry of Labor. But according to our interviewees, many work permits take up to a year or even more to be processed. And finally, once you actually get the work permit, you have to pay a holding fee of $200,000 per year. Now, these requirements pose additional barriers to the process of immigration, which is inherently costly and difficult. These formal requirements constitute the policy which governs immigration. And we find that the policy isn't particularly restrictive. In 2021, just 0.3% of all work permit applications, new and renewals, were declined. In addition to this, in Jamaica, there are many rights afforded to immigrants. Immigrants can own property independently. They have the right to social services that they can access without proving their status. And immigrants also have a pathway to citizenship. Now, when we look at all of these rights, we realize that the problem lies not only in just the policy, which is more or less liberal, but more so the process, which is bureaucratic and costly. As I close, I must address some political considerations. Immigration is politically sensitive and contentious the world over. A poll of 27 countries found that attitudes towards immigrants tended to be negative or neutral. But opinions tend to skew more anti-immigrant in high unemployment countries. One study found that in countries with unemployment rates at 15% or higher, more than 50% of people believe that current immigration levels should be reduced. And lastly, this is particularly relevant to Jamaica, low-skilled workers tend to be more anti-immigrant than higher-skilled workers. And this is important for us because 2/3 of the population in Jamaica that is employed are people who have no formal skills. In this study, we analyzed over 200 tweets posted on X between July 2023 and November 2023. What we saw was that negative views on immigration tended to focus on the fact that immigrants could potentially reduce wages for local Jamaicans or reduce employment among local Jamaicans and prevent them from upskilling themselves and taking advantage of higher paying opportunities in the labor market. However, positive views on immigration tended to focus on the fact that immigrants could potentially help to solve the current labor market situation, and also that immigrants potentially have a better work ethic, whatever this means. All of these concerns and others have some basis in fact, and all of the major ones were explored in this report. But now we have findings, and the public discourse should align with the evidence that we have available. Jamaica stands to benefit from a more liberal immigration policy and a streamlined immigration process. Liberalizing Jamaica's immigration policies could help to increase immigration, but these would need to be supported by a deliberate effort to streamline immigration processes to make the immigration framework more liberal. The immigration framework should be market-driven to increase efficiency of resource allocation and the dynamism of the labor market. In doing our study, we learned that the Ministry of Labor and Social Security is currently in the process of revising the work permit application process. As such, we do not issue any submissions further to these objectives. But based on the findings of this report, we make several recommendations. Our first recommendation is that Jamaica amend the Foreign Nationals and Commonwealth Citizens Act to remove the need for a work permit to state the name and place of employment of the permit holder. The name of the employer, and the place of employment of the permit holder. We also believe that fees associated with holding an approved work permit should be eliminated. Additionally, we recommend removing from the work permit application process the need for employers to prove that actions have been taken to recruit Jamaican workers. And finally, we recommend that Jamaica's national visa policy, which is currently being developed, include a category of visas that allow people to come here to work, come here independently to look for a job for 3 to 12 months, provided they meet certain requirements. Human history is a story of migration. In today's globalized world, where we have recognized the value of the cross border mobility of merchandise, of money, of ideas, the movement of people still remains misunderstood. Jamaica has for decades been on the losing end of this flow, but policymakers now have the opportunity to position the country to gain from the inevitable movement of people globally.
This is a thorny, highly sensitive issue. And so we'll have a lot to talk about. And perhaps that is where I think we should start. And I wonder if, Lisa, seeing as you have a lot of experience in the political arena, you could start by talking about why this is such a sensitive issue politically.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I think Capri in this report certainly, I've read several reports before, but I think this one is certainly timely. And I want to thank the European Union for funding it. And it's timely for a number of reasons. Jamaica is certainly at a crossroads in terms of its development, and I think we can go either way. We can either choose to become internationally competitive in a globalized world where we now have to leapfrog to grow the economy in other ways, or we can continue to, as your report says, and I think we all know it, grow the business processing, outsourcing, global services sector, and also construction. The problem that certainly I see as a political representative for 4 terms, which is almost 20 years, and I have a rural constituency. The major employer of labor in this country is agriculture. And I want to use that as a basis point for saying why I believe this is also extremely important. There are over 200,000 farmers in Jamaica. The problem is, if we ask, what does Jamaica look like on the value chain? Jamaica is still very primary in terms of its agricultural output. So we're still at the beginning of the value chain. And I don't think we have really transformed our agricultural sector because we haven't put technology in it, we haven't improved the kind of farming that we do, we haven't put in incentivized the factories for the value-added products. So we still remain at one side. And so what your report has also highlighted is not only is the workforce in many instances low skilled, but almost a third of the workforce also does not want to work. So when you break out the statistics in the report, you're seeing that the labor force for those people who can work, many of them actually don't want to work. And that's the part that I'm also interested in, because we, as a small country of 3 million people, don't have a lot we can compete with. So if we're actually sending, well, a lot of people are leaving and we're not importing high-skilled labor for the productivity, then we have to forecast what are those things, what do we want Jamaica's value chain to look like? And the reason why it's a politically thorny subject is because very similarly, if you look at the voting patterns across the country and the popular vote, many of the persons who vote as well don't want their jobs taken. For those who have jobs, they don't want them taken. And I don't think the conversation has been put in a way that you say to them, look, the persons who would come would actually grow the economy, grow your per capita income if the economy is grown, therefore increase your purchasing power because it has a multiplier effect. But I think overall, Damien, that's why it is, because I am a patriot and I'm a Jamaica first person, but I'm also in that feeling, I want to see my country become developed. And so we have to work on parallel tracks to get our education system up to par, our skills sector up to par, but we can't wait for that to happen. We also have to make sure that we have the skill sets to increase our productivity to grow the economy.
So we're going to be taking questions on a platform called Slido. Please go to slido.com and put in the event code Capri. Those who are watching the live stream online can also participate using Slido. Same procedure. Slido.com, put in the event code Capri, and there you can enter your questions. You can identify yourself if you wish or remain anonymous. And you also have the option to see questions that others have posed and to upvote those questions. And that will, by and large, determine which questions get asked of our panelists. So please participate. Minister, a lot of what the research revealed and the presentation spoke about is the process. That while a high percentage of those who apply for work permits get it, that there is a deterrent factor because the process is bureaucratic, it is expensive, it is inefficient, and that itself is a deterrent. Now, we hear that reforms are coming to that process. Would you like to, give us a prips as to what direction those reforms are going to take?
Firstly, let me say how pleased I am that Capri chose this particular topic. Not only is it timely, but it's critical in terms of our own contemplation at the ministry. And I want to thank you and the team and also our partners from the EU. And in the introduction, it was noted that the government is taking steps to transform. And the work permit regime is one of the priority areas for transformation. There is no question that the process as it is now is bureaucratic and in a way that requires adjustment. So we are disposing of the legacy system and moving towards more efficient business processes that will see us introducing a new web-based application that will allow for access online, greater efficiency, cutting down the process by perhaps 50% estimated or more, and ensuring greater, not just efficiency, but safety for those who will interact with the ministry. This is, to me, the critical area. When you talk about policy, the government of Jamaica has never had an issue. There's no adverse policy in terms of bringing the necessary skill to the country. Of course, the priority must be to prepare our people to participate in the labor force. But where necessary, and if you evaluate and examine the law as it is now, the law facilitates high-skilled persons coming to Jamaica and facilitates the filling of gaps where there are shortages of labor. But the Achilles heel has been the process. So
you're using the word facilitates loosely?
Well, I said the law, and I said that deliberately.
Okay.
Because the framework is there, but a framework must be operated by a system. And so the framework is there. However, the process has been the issue that has clogged and caused inordinate delays. And so that is where our focus is. For the last 8 months, serving in that ministry, we have been dedicated to driving that automation of the work permit regime. We have consultants and a full team that has been focused on it. And we are moving now into the phase of completion and testing, which will allow for us to completely transform the work permit regime hopefully within the next year. That will see most, if not all, of the issues that are consistently raised around 1 year for a permit, which I've never seen that myself, that will see those things disappear. Matter of fact, I'll tell you this, even without the automation, in the last 2 months, just based on adjustments in processes, we have been able to shorten the time for the work permit below 5 weeks. So it means that we have identified the issue, we have determined the strategy, and we are advancing the solutions. So those issues will be addressed.
Okay, but the experience of employers who make the application on behalf of their employees is not only that documentation requested, the application may not be complete, the opposite happens as well, that they go to check on the status of the application and they're asked for documentation that they have already submitted because the ministry is unable to find it.
You are 100% correct. That is why I'm saying we have identified all the issues.
Okay.
Matter of fact, we took the time to be very open and to put all of the issues on the table. The system as it is chaotic. However, we are, having assessed it and examined it and analyzed it, what we are putting in place now is a system that will bring efficiency and effectiveness by putting in place processes that are going to be much more simple, straightforward, clear, cogent, and address those issues, because you won't be able to move to the next stage without having all of the required documents.
Now, it's an important perspective for us to have, because many of us were of the impression that the difficulty, the obstacles represented the intention and the policy. And what we're getting from you is that the difficulty is actually worse than the intention. That it's the process that really gets in the way, and the intention is not quite as illiberal as it seems to be. Ronaldo, so we are focused on the difficulty of the work permit process, but the fact that we end up having the lowest number of immigrants or percentage of immigrants, except for Cuba and Haiti, as you mentioned in your opening statement, that must have to do with more than just the work permit process. So what are some of the other factors that you think might be at play and that came out of the research?
Right. So, there were factors that had to do with the conditions in Jamaica at the time. So if you're averaging 17% unemployment, you're not going to attract a lot of immigrants, right? There are other factors as well. If you have social instability, high crime rates, then it doesn't make the country a particularly attractive place. So that condition has persisted for decades in Jamaica. And the macroeconomy in the past 10, 12 years has largely stabilized, and now we have low unemployment rates, we're at full employment, and more opportunities are opening up. Now, outside of the employment situation, there's also the policy, in that people might want to come here. There might be opportunities in Jamaica, but there's still policy restrictive measures, right? Because Jamaica is not a particularly attractive country. It's upper middle income. It has many social issues. So when you compare us to other potential migrant destinations, we're not attractive. So what needs to happen as well is reform of policy that could help to make sure that once the process is efficient, then you can have more immigrants coming to Jamaica. For example, the need to prove that no Jamaican has been displaced. At the point at which an employer is seeking to get a foreign worker, it's highly likely that they've searched far and wide within Jamaica to make sure that there's no one here who could do the potential job. But additionally, there's opportunities for people to move here independently. So one of the recommendations speaks to allowing people to come to Jamaica and search independently for a job under certain conditions. This is also important because sometimes the employer in Jamaica might not be able to see an opportunity that an independent person overseas could see in Jamaica. And for those people, it should be important for them to have an avenue to come here.
Minister.
I just wanted to make a clarification. I heard you mention in the introduction that CARICOM members have that restriction as well.
Oh, no.
Oh, well, good. But also to note that we have in the law exemptions that are integrated in the Foreign Nationals and Commonwealth Citizens Act. And so persons who are highly skilled do not have the requirement of having to advertise, as you have said. And also, where there are gaps that have been identified, teachers and others who are in those categories, occupational categories, do not have the requirement of advertising. So the requirement to advertise in Jamaica is primarily to ensure that we are not overlooking Jamaicans. But we recognize the need for us to be able to create a dynamic labor market and to have the high skills and to fill the gaps. But I want it to be very clear, because I think it's something which is not well understood, that this is an element of the regime which is necessary to ensure that Jamaicans are protected, particularly those who may have the skill, but not provided the opportunity. And I don't see, there's no evidence, and I'd love to hear from Capri if there's any evidence that you found in your studies that indicates that this is a particular deterrent in terms of persons who are within that band, outside of the highly skilled, outside of those that are within the labor gap, that they have not applied for work permits because of this particular requirement.
We won't know.
What?
We won't know.
Oh no, I'm just checking if you have spoken to anyone.
No, but
because again, I have actually.
No, but what I
interacted,
saw
so.
actually in the report, even though the processes actually took long, at the end of it, it was only 0.3% of applications that were turned down. So it's not to say that work permits are being turned down. The question is, who is actually coming? And I think that's where we need to pivot and speak about in our country and how we need it to actually flourish. Because the report is so timely, and that's why I started off, Minister, by saying we're really at a crossroads in terms of our productivity. Because not everybody can be a construction worker, and not everybody wants to go into the business process or global services. So I believe what the report actually does too in terms of anchoring is to kind of place in context where we are as a labor market, where we are as productive employers, where we are in terms of how people actually view this country. Because whether you lump it collectively, what the data shows is that people leaving the Caribbean are 6 times greater than people coming to the Caribbean. And that's an interesting statistic. I won't go as far as to say it is a problem. Why it is interesting is that now Jamaica has a shortage of nurses. And our nurses are very critical to our industry and to our health sector. And how do we replenish that? Do we continue taking nurses from Cuba, for instance? Or do we say to our people, look, we have a shortage of nurses. Here is how we're going to incentivize you. Here is what we're going to do to make your lives better here. And I want to go even further, Damien, because I remember when I was Minister of Culture, Jamaica has a natural competitive advantage in terms of culture and the creative industry. But just naturally, we can do things better than other people in terms of dance and music. You got a dead yard band in rural areas, nobody learned to play classical music. So we have a natural talent for that. We have a natural talent for welcoming people, but we haven't gone into retirement tourism, for instance. So what has happened is that we still keep doing the same things the same way for a very long time. And we didn't prepare our labor market for globalization, 1, but also 2, now we haven't prepared it for automation. So many of the factories that even exist in Jamaica, I saw recently one bakery that is a state-of-the-art bakery, it won't be using a lot of employees because it is all automated. And the conversation that we need to be having with our Jamaican people, here are the jobs that are going to become available because we're reorienting our labor market because these are the areas that we are going to go all in to compete globally. Exports of value-added agriculture is one. How are we training our farmers to plant more in a particular way? Are we going head-to-head with Tabasco internationally? Why don't we have more Walker's Woods, more spur trees? And then teach our people that, look, you can plant in this area more pepper because you're good at planting pepper, but I also need the chemists. I need those people in the factories. So we are going to incentivize you to go to school because in the next 2 years, we're going to have 5,000 jobs in this area. That will transform people's thinking as to how they view their country. That will transform young people to say, you know what, we can't stay in Jamaica because I like that. And not only can my cousin in Southeast St. Ann, who plant up in Bensington, plant some cash crop pepper, but since I was the one who became this person, we can have some vertical integration and synchronicity in the family. But as politicians and as a former policymaker in that area, and I know Minister Charles has just started in that particular ministry, we don't start off with bad intentions. I think all of us would like to, I know I certainly want to see this country become a first world country before I die, but that takes deliberate purpose. That is not left up to chance. That requires all of us to be able to sit down together, PNP and JLP, Capri, everyone to say, these are the 10 benchmarks that we have to go to. Why is it that China is known as the manufacturing capital of the world? Why is Germany known as building the best automation and engineering? Why is it that India is known for the best computer software programmers? If I need 500 software programmers, I probably call India first. What is Jamaica known for? And that's where we have to start from. What does our value chain look like? And I believe we have those industries that we can pivot to. And if we start asking those questions in a realistic way and put the money there, why hasn't the Ministry of Culture, and even in my time, what it will take to really turn Jamaica into a cultural powerhouse of the world is capital. And it takes capital not only to train people, but it takes people to build the restaurants and the performance centers, etc. That's why when you go to Europe, you can go to an opera, it's the museums. We have to start asking those questions. But in the meantime, know that we have to get some productivity going because as my other hat is that I'm the board member, we decided as a family to invest in logistics and to vertically integrate the businesses to have value-added agriculture. So now we not only slaughter pigs, but we produce the bacon and the ham, etc. And we have a bakery, and that's all in my constituency. For example, where we're having a problem, and this is a real problem, is logistics is a buzzword in Jamaica, but our people don't really understand the tenets that go into logistics and the 360 degree in the way it should work. So you have people that are really good on the warehouse floor, but the minute you start moving it and explaining it, teamwork tends to be a problem. And so where we're finding problems is not at the low skill level with the warehouse and even at the supervisory level, it's a middle management level that we're having issues with in terms of reporting, proper accounting, making sure that fuel is used appropriately, making sure that the economies of scale work accordingly, making sure that you understand all of those things and that there's an interconnectedness not only with your department, but with every other department. So we tend to work as silo people in Jamaica as well. Once our department is working good, we're good. But there's not a real 360 degree understanding of how the entire business should work. And that comes with international exposure sometimes, and other persons coming in to train and to say, look, this is how the larger economies do it. Here's what is expected of you. And I would have that conversation because one thing we can tell you about Jamaican people, you know, if you tell them to come in your car because this is a destination you're taking them to and they trust you well enough, they will come in your car and go with you. If them don't trust you, them not coming. And so the immigration conversation has to had, because even in the report, they weren't opposed to immigration. It was that we weren't conversing with them as to the type of skills that we need in Jamaica. So everybody just thought we're bringing in people just to take every job.
Okay, a number of issues have come out here. I'd like to get into all of them. Slido.com, put in the event code Capri. A Slido viewer wants to dig deeper into why such a large share of the labor force such a large share of the population, the working age population is outside the labor force, and wants to explore what the reasons are for people not wanting to be in the labor force. I'm going to kick that question forward by about 8 months, because that is another study that Capri is now engaged in to investigate and interrogate these hundreds of thousands of persons who are classified as outside the labor force, to see if we can understand the extent to which it's a choice or its circumstances. So you can join us back at the end of the summer for that. Also coming from Slido is a question I want to direct to Ronaldo. If we remove the requirement for persons to state, to demonstrate that there is no local person and that there's a job that they're coming into, how do we ensure that people don't come in and don't intend to work?
So the process of migration is difficult and expensive. Internationally speaking, even after decades of liberalized immigration policies all over the world, just 3.6% of the global population is international migrants. And most of those persons are going to the global north.
Are what?
Going to the global north. They're going to rich countries.
Yep.
So the incentive for someone to get up one morning in Colombia and come to Jamaica to just hang out, and they don't have any money and they don't have anywhere to stay, is pretty low, right? But even without this requirement to show that you have a specific employer, a specific place of working, that you're not displacing a Jamaican worker, there are still ways to ensure that people are in Jamaica doing legitimate business. And I think that should be the focus. So we didn't recommend removing a work permit requirement altogether. The process should just be simple, straightforward, and it should not include demonstrating additional things that don't substantively contribute to what you're trying to achieve.
But added to that, can I just ask, do you think, because in your recommendations as well, you also pointed out another issue with the work permit. Do you think that persons applying, should it be only the person asking you to come for that specific title? So if I'm employing Damian King to come and be a computer programmer.
Yes, that would be a good idea.
Is that all he could do then in Jamaica?
Can
Do you think that should stay?
Can I add to that?
Yep. And then I'm going to come to you,
Well,
Ronaldo, because the report does speak to
Yes.
People not being tied to particular jobs. So Minister first and then Ronaldo.
Well, both issues. So in terms of the matter of advertising, I think I addressed that in terms of indicating that that is not a restraint for persons who are highly skilled and not for those occupational categories that relate to areas where there are labor shortages. It is, again, to ensure that we do not have circumstances that inadvertently or otherwise overlook Jamaicans. So I think it is an essential element of the structure and architecture of our work permit regime. In terms of the specificity now of the work permit, tying you to a particular business, it's important. It's important because we have responsibilities as a government to ensure that any individual that's working in Jamaica is working within the ambit of our legislation, our laws. We have responsibilities to ensure their own rights, to protect them from human trafficking, to ensure that we can identify where they are, to monitor and to inspect. And if you look across, comparative analysis across the world, there is, again, nothing that shows me that there is negative from this. Matter of fact, based on our operations and our obligations, having this information will allow for us as a government to be able to better manage the circumstances of persons who immigrate and who work within our system.
And I wanted to say something when you're
Yes.
finished.
Okay. And for the counter argument, Ronaldo.
Yeah, when you tie it on the front end, it becomes a disincentive. Because if it is the case that an immigrant could potentially come here, work, earn, abide by laws, and be governed by general processes of law enforcement that do screen for human trafficking, that do ensure people aren't being exploited, then that is sufficient. What you have instead is, in status quo, the person having to tie themselves to a specific employer, which could itself lead to exploitation, which could itself be a situation where the employee cannot move jobs if they find a better opportunity elsewhere. So instead of requiring that the person is tied to a specific employer on their work permit, and then in order to change that, they have to submit to the ministry some application, make it so that by law, they have to report when they change employers, so that they don't have to go through another application process. They just get a new job and then they make the ministry aware that they have changed jobs.
It's nice to say, but in practical terms, it is extremely difficult for us to manage the processes with the staff that we have. Going out and inspecting and monitoring is critical to ensuring that we can protect workers, whether they are coming to Jamaica or whether they are Jamaicans. So I understand what you are putting forward, but in practical terms, I don't think that it is something that would be, at this time at least, ideal. I believe that we have a responsibility to make sure that we have an environment that can be properly managed, and putting in place these requirements is a significant part of having a regime that is structured, controlled, and to the benefit and balance of the persons who are coming to Jamaica to work and the persons who are here in Jamaica working.
Well, that is what where I wanted to go. Because if the data shows, and the data does show not only in European countries, but in other countries around the world, that immigration actually increases the per capita income and the GDP of a country. I believe that if any government wants to control it in a way, we have to, that is the gap on the X and Y axis that we have to interrupt. In other words, if the private sector, which is the agency that the audience and the people and the owners of capital that create jobs in this country, are trying to increase their productivity to actually drive the economy. And I'm talking about now Jamaican owners of capital. I see Chris here, I see other people here who are in the audience who are not foreign-owned companies. And no, I'm not disrespecting foreign-owned companies at all. Foreign direct investment is critical, and I welcome foreign direct investment. But let us say we have a Jamaican investor, and they recognize that in order to grow, they have to import about 100 high-skilled workers in a particular area. Am I hearing that the government is going to police that? Because at the end of the day, that's an employer-employee relationship as well. And we do have unions and labor laws, etc., that can do that. And I have a concern because we have to call a spade a spade. This economy is growing at anemic levels. And if we really want exponential growth, those are the questions that we have to ask Damien. Where is it going to come from? How are we going to get it? A lot of the iconic Jamaican brands that Jamaican think are owned by Jamaicans are not. Our rum companies, many of our insurance companies, for example, many of our hotels are owned by foreigners, and they get the work permits to bring the persons in. And that is when they can prove that there's not a Jamaican. But sometimes, some of the persons that they're bringing in as well in some of the hotels are dancers and others that I have seen who are not Jamaican. And so there are actually loopholes in it too. But what we're talking about here, Minister, from what the report says, and I keep going back to the report because I'm data driven, this is not Lisa Hanna's opinions. This is what Capri has gone out and looked at. One, immigration supports entrepreneurship and it supports productivity. And in every economy, it has grown the economies by over 4% in some of the economies that has said, look, we need to immigrate high-skilled people. The other thing that it does is that it creates a multiplier effect in the economy. So if we were to ask ourselves, no, where do we need that labor? Where does Jamaica need that labor? And to say to our people, look, we're not taking your jobs. As a matter of fact, there will be technical transfer to train you. And this is the direction. But what we have failed to do in the immigration argument, and I started it off and I will continue, is we keep talking about immigration, but our people have to emigrate because we have nothing else here for them. Our nurses are leaving, our teachers are leaving. So we have to find a way to say to our own people, here are the industries we're creating for Jamaica so that internationally we're known for this. But I raise it, Damien, because when I heard the minister saying, well, we have to police it and we have to inspect it and that is a disincentive. When before I came here this evening, I called 3 of my friends. One who is leading a Middle Eastern serious hotel development in luxury tourism. Another who is building luxury hotels around the world and is a leading luxury, used to be the president of a leading luxury tourism chain. And another one who is in business. And I asked them, why not Jamaica? And they said, it's too hard. We decided to go somewhere else with our money. And it was hard for them because they just hear a lot of different things about labor, how militant it is, how hard it is to get in, how hard it is to do business in Jamaica. Now, if we had some of those 5-star things that are going into those other places, it would also help to transform because they're not all inclusive, for instance. And that broke my heart. And they spoke to me for very, very long. And it had to do with just trying to do business in Jamaica.
I wanted to
So, Minister,
respond.
this is...
I wanted a chance to respond to the policing.
This is a central question,
Yeah.
at least one of the central questions in this discussion, because you did go on about the need to monitor, the need to register, the need to police, the need to, and it really is a question. Why does it need so much micromanagement? Mm-hmm. In the presentation, there was the idea that we should allow ourselves to be led by the market. So why do you feel it needs such close micromanagement, which clearly is going to be a disincentive to people to go through all of those steps?
There is so much being said that I wish I had a notepad because, for instance, a lot of what Lisa has said, important, but it pulls us from the work permit regime discussion to agriculture and productivity and all these things that are connected, but it can't be discussed in this time. So I'll say this. Firstly, I didn't say police, but I'll accept it. And I have no difficulty at all indicating that part of our local and international obligations is to make sure that any individual working in this country is protected. We have the responsibility to make sure that we manage the working conditions, monitor, inspect as necessary, and we are facilitators as much as we are regulators. The first thing I've said to my team is, listen, the conversation that we haven't had here is around the fact that, yes, 17% unemployment, but now it's at 4.5.
No, he said it was
yes,
full employment.
Yes, we have had significant difficulties, but we're moving in the right direction. Never before have we seen the kind of indicators in the last 20 years that we're seeing now. So all of what we're discussing, even the friends that Lisa would have spoken to about why or why not to choose Jamaica, the real issue has been the processes in the work permit regime when it comes on to that specific area. There are many other discussions that we can have in terms of productivity, in terms of agriculture and otherwise, which are all moving in the right direction. But for this specific discussion around the work permit regime, we have taken and are taking the steps to address the major challenges, to identify strategies to move us forward, and to implement solutions. And we are data-driven. We are using empirical information and evidence to determine what is going to afford the best positioning for Jamaica. Matter of fact, I tell you this. One of the scenarios that was proposed a while ago had to do with a friend of yours perhaps having 100 highly skilled persons coming into Jamaica. I think that's what you mentioned.
No,
100,
hypothetically.
Hypothetically. And if there was a scenario, Sir King, where 100 highly skilled individuals were needed to drive business in Jamaica that could not be identified in Jamaica, we would go out of our way to facilitate it. We understand that at the pace that we're moving, for us to have sustainable development, it will require a dynamic labor force. It will require us to focus on education and training and upskilling our people. It will require us to create a system that is more efficient and facilitatory, which we are already doing. It will require us to look on all the tenets of the introduction of technology in agriculture and other sectors, which we are doing. It will require us to focus on the economy and to see how we can stabilize the economy so Jamaica can start to take care of itself, which we are doing. We're able to expand our infrastructure, which we are doing, and other things. So, again, the discussion is very broad, but if I'm to focus today on brain gain, solving the labor shortage, and competing for global talent based on what you have said, most of the things you have identified will focus on deficiencies in our process. And as I've laid out, we understand those deficiencies and we are addressing those deficiencies. The policy, which I'm hoping to hear from you, if there are issues in terms of policy, I would love to know what specific issues in terms of policy and legislation, because that could also assist us in making sure that we're creating the framework that goes along with the process.
I think I saw that there were about 4 pieces of legislation that needed simple addressing in the recommendations.
Well,
So if
you mentioned, well, go ahead.
So yeah, so if I could on that, you mentioned going out of your way to facilitate a specific investment, and I think that was just an example in response to the case that was raised just now. I think what we're focused on is creating an environment in itself that is welcoming to investors who would like to come here. So in terms of potential policy changes, one of the examples that came out of the recommendations was having people being able to immigrate to Jamaica independently and seek work, meeting certain conditions, right? I think that's a critical example. So you spoke earlier about exempted categories, for example, and exempted occupations like teachers and so on. And I think this underlines the problem that we're discussing, in that if you have to create an exemption, like that is already a process that is additionally bureaucratic to everything that you have to do. So the alternative is to make a process whereby a particular immigrant, regardless of their occupation, once they can demonstrate being of a certain level, then it's really easy for them to come in, because a potential investor, I think you asked for evidence earlier on one of these, we actually had 3 separate interviewees that spoke about specific cases where persons wanted to invest in Jamaica. They considered Jamaica as a location, but they decided not to go with Jamaica because they had concerns about the labor market situation. And again, this has to be put in the context of the fact that Jamaica is not an attractive country for people to come to in the first place. We should be like trying to get people to come here as much as possible by simplifying the process, the policy as much as possible.
The fact
Before you
is
respond,
Minister,
before you respond, let me just bring in Lisa.
So there were 4 pieces of legislation. I think it was about 4.
It's one piece, but like multiple.
Yeah, but multiple
Yeah.
pieces that accord with it that just needed some tweaking. I think that in
You mean in the
recommendations.
recommendations?
Yeah, but the what I wanted to put there, because some of the things that I hear coming from Jamaicans, and I would be open to it. So when for example I would like to go and invest in another particular Caribbean country as a foreigner or in some other Asian countries, as a foreigner, I have to have a partner in that country who is a national of the country. And I think oftentimes the narratives and the discussions, certainly at the Jamaican level, become very aggrieved is when Jamaicans say, boy, Jamaicans just sell out everything and we want to import labor. So there's this real feeling that we're giving away the country, selling it off, and on top of it, we're now going to bring in people now to take the jobs. So at the policy level, I think we need to start looking at giving Jamaicans themselves ownership. Even if someone is coming in to invest, the conversation has to start whether there needs to be a Jamaican partner in that investment, for example. And I think that would also help with the immigration part of it. And it's not very difficult to do because other countries actually do it. But if you do that and make the process clear, easier for people to do investments, because he's right, and I get it from persons that I know, Jamaica is not on the top of their list for investment because it feels too hard to do business here, not only in terms of getting the bureaucracy and the approvals. I mean, we had a building, for example, land from China and sat on the ground for 6 months before we got the approval from the Kingston Municipal Corporation. And it wasn't because we weren't calling and calling and calling and calling, and the building sat there for 6 months. And so what you find is that at different levels, whether it's hard to get things done.
Minister, I'm really picking up a discrepancy between, on the one hand, people talking about, the need for labor, the shortage of skills, the difficulty of getting through the process, and still on that same hand, you're talking about the reforms that are going to facilitate the process, but at the same time, the connotation of the words you're using suggests that you want to maintain a tight control on the situation.
What words?
That you're not really trusting that we're in a situation now where we need to expand the labor force by way of immigration. And I want to add to the context by saying that, Capri published a report last year called Growthless Jobs. And in that report, our central argument was that we are now in an economic scenario that is completely different from what existed for the last half century, for the last 70 years.
Amen.
Starting with Arthur Lewis in the 1950s, who wrote a lot about how you manage a labor surplus economy. And all the industrial incentive legislation in the 60s was because we had a surplus of labor. And in the 1970s, there were a lot of make-work programs because there was a surplus of labor. And then in the 80s and 90s, we have become infatuated with special economic zones because it was a way to create employment without even contributing to the GDP and without contributing much to fiscal revenues. We were desperate to allow these enclaves whose only benefit was to create employment. So all of our thinking for the last, since the post-war economy has been about a desperation to get jobs. You'll remember, Minister, that in the last election campaign, general election campaign, there was a competition on the podium between the two parties promising how many hundreds of thousands of jobs they could create. We are now in a different world. Growthless Jobs said that we have been able to expand employment so much that the labor force is now effectively fully employed without getting economic growth. So that is now the constraint. It requires a whole new set of thinking. And you are still sounding like, we need to control this thing tightly and make sure that there's not somebody who's sitting under a tree in Magotty who could possibly get this job in St. Thomas.
Let me chime in. Firstly, I respect your interpretation. You're the one and only Damian King. You have that interpretation. You know, the conversation we're not having though is, and again, we're all open to articulate the prospects for our country in whatever way we wish. Jamaica is not attractive. Jamaica is unattractive. To me, Jamaica is developing. It's growing. It is doing better.
Not to
the World Bank, not to you. The World Bank indicators are that Jamaica is becoming more positive. Fitch, globally, has increased our ratings. Investment in terms of hotel across Europe coming to Jamaica. So again, it's about your perspective and about how you see the facts. For instance, in your interpretation as our moderator, you have identified that my words reflect a control. Let me be very clear. I have no difficulty with the word control, but I didn't say control. What I'm speaking about is the balance between facilitating, managing, and ensuring that we are protecting the rights of any worker in our country. If you want to define it as policing or control, that's a matter for you. We all have our own interpretation. For me and for my ministry, our mandate is clear. We have to make sure that Jamaicans are prepared to participate. We have to make sure that anyone else who we welcome into our labor force is also protected. It's one labor market. And even Jamaicans who are going overseas, we have the responsibility to make sure if they're on an overseas employment program that they're also protected. So define it as you may, the bottom line is that the government of Jamaica, from work permit to agriculture to infrastructure to our economy, is developing Jamaica. And I rather say that instead of saying we are unattractive, that we are becoming much more attractive. And we are much more attractive today than we were 20 years ago.
All right, I want to jump in here really, really quickly, because I think it is important that we recalibrate where we are. So I'm Jamaican first. I was born here, I went to school here, I went to university here, and I chose to live here. So being a Jamaican, I can't see Jamaica as being unattractive. I think I'm quite attractive, actually, as a Jamaican, and I think most of us believe that. The issue that we're talking about here is what Damien just alluded to. We have almost 100% employment in this country, but the majority, 70% of that employment, based on what the report says, comes from construction and it comes from BPO. That's where the majority of the new jobs came from. That 164,000, I think the number was, or something like that approximately, 70% of that has come from that area. So we're not talking about people not being able to work. But what you also have is now that is the rule and not the exception 40 years ago when only one child went to university, or to get into university was an exception. Now every picnic can go to university and is going. Everybody has a first degree that is almost graduating from high school. They leave high school and they want to go away. And they want to go away because not only do the people come to my constituency office and the farm workers, many people want to go on the farm work program, but they also want to go away for better opportunities. What we're saying here is we all know Jamaica is moving in the right direction based on what the multilaterals are saying. But Jamaicans don't feel that Jamaica is moving in the right direction. And that's the difference. Any multilateral can come to this country and read data. They're not living the lives of people on the ground. And when you have people who go to university and can't get a particular job, it's simply because as a country, the top 10 in-demand jobs that exist today did not exist 10 years ago. And so what is happening is that we're not foresighting our economy, identifying the things that are necessary, and preparing our population for those things that will exist. Because a child that starts a 3-year engineering degree today, what they study by the time they graduate will be obsolete, especially with AI. Where this world is going, Jamaica is not ready with our education system to prepare the babies coming in basic school and in preschool for the next 10 years. And that is why we have this immigration conversation now. So the question, the answer, Minister, and I listen, I'm on this, may I sink or swim with Jamaica? Because I'm a resident of no other country or a citizen of no other country. So right here says where me have to go born, bury, and rest in peace. But we have to be honest in the conversation. And the truth is we have had jobs, but we now have to have the economic growth. And that's where where is it going to come from? Which is what I believe Capri's study is showing.
Okay, one of my, hang on, Minister.
1 second.
Hang on. No, I'm going to come back to you.
I remember I'm not running again, you know, so we have to go.
I'm going to come back to you. One of my takeaways from what Lisa said is that she was able to quote data that was not in this report, but was in previous Capri reports. So Lisa reads all of Capri's reports.
I do, actually. I do.
So we're running out of time, but I'd like to know if anybody in the audience has a brief question that they would like to ask of our panelists. Okay. In that event, let me allow the minister to respond, and then I'm going to ask each of you to just give a final statement to say what you want to leave with the audience. But first,
again, a lot has been said by my colleague, Lisa. And the reality is this: honest conversation around Jamaica is not going to be a pigeonhole conversation around what's not happening. It will be a conversation that looks on the context of where we are within the facts of what we have done in recent time. When you look on, for instance, a minister that is focused on skills and digital transformation, when you look on the fact that you have Hard Trust NSTA providing free of cost opportunities for any youngster in this country that wants to go and get a skill, to go and receive that skill. When you look on the fact that we have in Jamaica now more opportunities than we had 10 years ago, and it is continuing to go, it doesn't mean that we're where we want to be. It means that we're along that trajectory. That is why we have a transformation unit, of which this work permit regime is an element of that unit that is being transformed. And there are several other aspects, because we have identified the challenges. Much of what has been said has been identified, but an honest conversation would put on the table that those things are now being addressed.
Okay, I'm going to take that as your final thoughts that you want to leave with the audience. And I'm going to ask Ronaldo, out of all of this discussion and the research, what is the key thing you want to leave us with?
So the team worked really hard on the report, so please read it. But even if Jamaica was as rich as Switzerland, it would still be important for economic growth for it to be easy for people to immigrate to Jamaica, to help to increase economic output, diversify the economy, etc. So not being Switzerland, we should do as much as we can to compete. I take what the minister says about the fulfillments that we need to meet under international law, but we also have to do everything we can to reform the processes and the policy to improve the framework.
Thank you.
I'll just take 30 seconds. I thought the report was excellent. And I think it is a tipping point for what we can actually achieve in Jamaica. Persons should go online and read it with a view to understanding that the Caribbean as a place, 6 times more people are leaving than we're bringing people. So there is a gap if we're going to increase our productivity. I support several of the recommendations that have been made in the report, but I want Jamaicans to understand that I want our passport that says Jamaica to be one that does not have a problem to get a visa. I don't want Jamaicans to have to wonder if they can get a visa to the United States, to the United Kingdom, to other countries, because we're not considered a first world country. In order to get there, we have to start being honest with ourselves. And we have to have the kind of economy that's safe, that's diversified, and that we have a highly educated workforce and population. That requires honesty, but it also requires us making some sacrifices. And it doesn't mean that one is exclusive to the other. We can run on parallel tracks with the right policies.
Thank you very much. In this discussion, I think that as much as there is a sort of broad consensus that we need to facilitate increased labor immigration to Jamaica, two contentious issues seem to be left hanging and needs further discussion and further debate. One of them was the specific one about the need of an employer to prove that he has made a fair effort to identify a local worker. Some on the panel seem to think that that constitutes a significant barrier to the process, and certainly representing the government, the minister thinks that it continues to be important to have that check in place. So that has to be resolved as we go forward. And the second one, what I think appears to be a contentious issue, is how much are we going to let the process be led by the market and allow people to make decisions outside of the current restrictions about where they work and what they're doing, and the extent to which the ministry feels that they need to monitor closely what the immigrants are doing and whom they're doing it with. So hopefully that debate will continue as we move forward to facilitate labor immigration. That wraps up our panel discussion. I'm going to now ask our host for the evening, Nicole Walker, to close us out.
Good evening again, everyone. And we are at the end of the launch of the first of 9 reports funded under this project by the EU. And again, thank you to the EU for its continued support to Capri. I want to thank the panel, Minister Charles, Ms. Hannah, Ronaldo, and Damian for having such a rich discussion. I do hope that we have gained a deeper understanding of the whole phenomenon of migration. I encourage you to read our report. As Ronaldo said, we put a lot of effort and time into it, as our research team and the team in general usually does. So we really want you to read our report, and we'll be continuing the discussion on our social media platforms, so please stay tuned for that. And the next report launch is in February. It's another EU-funded report, and you'll hear more about that as time goes on. Do have a great evening.